My husband sold my entire jewelry collection while I was away visiting my family. When I returned home, he greeted me with a smug look and said, "I made a major business move while you were gone." Confused, I asked, "What kind of move?" His grin widened as he leaned back. "I sold your jewelry. Every single piece. That's what funded my empire." At first, I thought it was a joke, a terrible one. But as his words sank in, I froze. My jewelry collection, built over years, with heirlooms passed down from my grandmother and mother, along with pieces I'd bought with my own money, was gone. "Michael, what did you do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He laughed, completely misreading my tone. "Helen, do you have any idea how much all those diamonds and gold were worth? Enough to kickstart a business that's going to put us on the map. It's brilliant. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I snapped, anger bubbling to the surface. "You had no right, Michael. That was my jewelry, things that mattered to me. You don't get to decide what happens to them." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Helen. You hardly wore half of it. At least now it's being used for something meaningful." I didn't bother arguing further. If there was one thing I'd learned about Michael, it was that his ambition always came first. When we met, I admired his drive. But over the years, his charm revealed a darker side, a man who bulldozed through anyone or anything that got in his way. Still, I never thought he'd stoop this low. The jewelry wasn't just valuable, it was deeply personal. Every piece had a story: the sapphire ring my grandmother gave me on her 80th birthday, the diamond bracelet my mom wore on her wedding day, the pendant I bought to celebrate my first big promotion. They were all gone now because Michael decided my belongings were his to use. But Michael didn't know everything. Months ago, after hearing about a string of burglaries in the area, I'd taken precautions. My most valuable jewelry had discreet tracking devices hidden in their clasps. That evening, I sat in my empty bedroom, staring at the drawer where my jewelry box used to be. My frustration was palpable, but I forced myself to remain calm. Michael thought he'd won, but he had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app I'd installed. A map of the city lit up with blinking red dots. My heart pounded. The tracking devices were still active. One dot showed my necklace at a consignment shop downtown. Another marked the bracelet, now sitting in a warehouse. Michael believed I couldn't do anything about what he'd done. But the evidence was right there in my hands. I called Megan, my best friend, who immediately answered. "Megan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're not going to believe what Michael did." "What now?" she sighed, already sounding exasperated. I told her everything: the sale, the tracking devices, his smug attitude. By the time I finished, she was as furious as I was. "Helen, you need to go to the police," she said firmly. "I will," I replied. "First thing tomorrow." I hung up and stared at the glowing dots on my phone screen. For once, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, I walked into the police station, my phone in hand and my heart pounding. I'd never filed a police report before, but Megan's words echoed in my mind: "You have to go to the police." She was right, Michael had gone too far, and this time, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. At the front desk, an officer greeted me with a polite smile. "How can we help you today?" "I need to report a theft," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves. "Was the stolen property yours?" "Yes," I replied. "My jewelry collection was sold without my permission." The officer's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he nodded and motioned for me to follow him to a desk. I explained everything: how Michael had sold my jewelry without my consent, its sentimental value, and the tracking devices I'd installed months earlier. When I showed him the app on my phone, his expression grew serious. "This is strong evidence," he said, taking notes. If these tracking signals are accurate, we may be able to recover some of the items quickly. Do you have a detailed list of what was taken? I do, I said, pulling a notebook out of my bag. I had written down every piece, its description, and its approximate value. He flipped through the pages, nodding as he read. The sapphire ring. The diamond bracelet. The gold pendant. These weren't just items, they were pieces of my history, now scattered across the city because of Michael's greed. The officer, whose name tag read Detective Carter, looked up and met my gaze. We'll start by verifying the tracking locations. If the jewelry is where you say it is, this could be a straightforward recovery. However, because your husband sold these items without your consent, it's also considered fraud. Are you prepared to press charges? The weight of his question hung in the air, but I didn't hesitate for long. Yes, I said firmly. I want him held accountable. Detective Carter gave me a reassuring nod. Good. Let's get to work. As I walked out of the station, a mix of emotions swirled inside me, relief that the police were taking me seriously, anger at Michael's betrayal, and determination to reclaim what was mine. For too long, I had let Michael get away with his selfish, manipulative behavior. This time, I wasn't going to back down. That evening, Megan came over, carrying a bottle of wine and an encouraging smile. Okay, she said, settling onto my couch. Tell me everything. How did it go? I filled her in on my conversation with Detective Carter, the tracking data, and the next steps the police planned to take. She listened intently, her expression shifting between outrage and admiration. You're handling this way better than I would, she said when I finished. If it were me, I'd be at his office, flipping tables by now. I laughed despite myself. Trust me, Megan, the thought crossed my mind. But the police have the evidence, and I think this is my best chance to get everything back. She raised her glass. To you, Helen, for not letting that smug jerk get away with it. I clinked my glass against hers. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The next day, Detective Carter called me with an update. We've confirmed the locations of 3 items, he said. 2 are at a consignment shop downtown, and another is in a warehouse. The store owners are cooperating, so we'll begin the recovery process shortly. I'll keep you updated as things progress. A wave of relief swept over me. Thank you, Detective. Does this mean I'll get them back soon? It's looking good, he replied. However, we've also uncovered some concerning details in your husband's financial records. There are transactions that suggest fraud, possibly even tax evasion. This situation might be bigger than we initially thought. My stomach tightened. What does this mean for me? For now, you're not implicated, Detective Carter said, his tone reassuring. But we'll need you to stay cooperative as we investigate further. Your husband's actions could lead to serious legal consequences. As I hung up, the reality of the situation sank in. Michael hadn't just sold my jewelry, he'd entangled himself in something much darker. That evening, when Michael came home, I decided to confront him. He walked into the kitchen, tossing his keys on the counter like nothing had happened. Busy day? He asked casually. I crossed my arms. Michael, we need to talk. Now. His carefree attitude vanished, replaced by wariness. What's this about? I know what you've done, I said firmly. You sold my jewelry without my permission, and now the police are investigating you. They've also flagged your business accounts. What are you hiding? His face paled, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. Investigating? That's ridiculous. I didn't steal anything, Helen. That jewelry was just sitting there gathering dust. I thought you'd be happy it was put to good use. I shook my head, disgusted. Put to good use? Michael, you stole from me. You had no right. And now the police are uncovering fraud in your business accounts. What else have you been doing? His expression darkened as anger flashed in his eyes. You went to the police? Are you trying to ruin me? I didn't ruin anything, you did, I snapped. This isn't just about the jewelry, Michael. It's about all the lies and manipulation. For years, I've let you bulldoze over me, but I'm done. You've made a huge mistake, Helen, he hissed. You think you can just turn on me like this? No, Michael, I said, my voice steady. The mistake was trusting you. But that's over now. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He stared at me, speechless, before storming out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about recovering my jewelry anymore, it was about standing up for myself, for reclaiming the pieces of my life Michael had tried to steal. The next morning, I received another call from Detective Carter. Mrs. Parker, he said, his tone steady but serious, we've recovered several more items from your jewelry collection. Most were found at a private auction house. However, during the investigation, we've also uncovered additional financial discrepancies tied to your husband's business accounts. This case is expanding. My chest tightened. What kind of discrepancies? There's evidence of tax evasion and possible embezzlement, he explained. Some of these transactions overlap with the proceeds from the jewelry sale, but others point to external accounts. We'll need to keep digging. Hearing this didn't shock me anymore. By now, I had come to terms with the fact that Michael wasn't just careless, he was deceitful. What does this mean for me? I asked carefully. For now, you're not involved, he assured me. But it's critical that we establish your financial independence. If you haven't already, I recommend speaking with a lawyer to protect your assets. I thanked him and hung up, my mind spinning. Michael's betrayal ran far deeper than I'd ever imagined. He wasn't just reckless, he was corrupt. That afternoon, I took the next step toward reclaiming my life. I met with a lawyer Megan had recommended, someone who specialized in both family law and financial recovery. Sitting in her office, I laid out everything, the stolen jewelry, the ongoing police investigation, and Michael's growing list of legal troubles. This is a complex situation, the lawyer said, flipping through her notes. But you've already done a lot to protect yourself by going to the authorities. We'll file for a legal separation immediately and begin securing your personal assets. Hearing her say those words was both terrifying and empowering. I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, planning to untangle my life from Michael's. But after everything he'd done, I knew this was the only way forward. What about his business? I asked. Could his actions affect me financially? Potentially, she said. That's why we need to act quickly. If his business is under investigation, we'll want to ensure that your finances are protected and completely separate from his. That evening, as I reviewed the paperwork my lawyer had given me, Megan called to check in. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm okay, I replied, surprising even myself. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I'm in control. It's hard, but I know I'm making the right decisions. You are, Megan said with conviction. And don't forget how strong you are, Helen. You've taken charge of your life, and that's no small thing. Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. 2 days later, I received another call from Detective Carter. Mrs. Parker, he said, gesturing for me to sit down in his office, we've traced almost all of your jewelry. The auction house and consignment stores involved have been cooperative, and we're finalizing the recovery of the items. But the evidence against your husband is mounting. The DA is preparing charges. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. What kind of charges are we talking about? Between the unauthorized sale of your property, financial fraud, and tax evasion, he's facing multiple counts. It's highly unlikely he'll walk away from this without significant legal consequences. Hearing those words made my heart feel lighter. Michael's actions had caused so much damage, but now it was clear he wouldn't escape accountability. That evening, Michael came home late. I was seated at the dining table, surrounded by legal documents. He stopped in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to hostility as his eyes landed on the stack of papers. "What is this?" he asked sharply, nodding toward the documents. "Divorce filings," I said calmly, not looking up from the page I was reviewing. He froze, his face paling. "You're divorcing me?" "Yes, Michael," I said, meeting his gaze. "This is the end. I refuse to let you drag me down any further." He scoffed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You think you can just walk away from this? Everything I've done has been for us, Helen, for this family." I laughed bitterly. "No, Michael. You didn't do it for us. You did it for yourself. You stole from me, lied to me, and left me to clean up your mess. This family? It was never about us, it was always about you." He stared at me, speechless for once. "You don't mean this," he said finally, his voice quieter. "I do," I said firmly. "And you'll see how serious I am when the papers are served." His composure cracked entirely. Without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. As I sat there, my heart pounding, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of my freedom. The following morning, my lawyer called. "Helen, the divorce papers have been filed, and Michael will be served later today," she said. I exhaled deeply, the weight on my chest lifting. "Thank you. I'm ready for this." "You've shown a lot of strength throughout this process," she said warmly. "Keep focusing on yourself and your next steps. We'll take care of the rest." After the call, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring out the window. For weeks, my life had felt like a chaotic whirlwind, but now there was clarity. My jewelry was being recovered, the police investigation was progressing, and the divorce filings marked a clean break from Michael's toxic influence. That afternoon, Detective Carter called again. "Mrs. Parker, I have good news. We've recovered all but one item from your jewelry collection. The remaining piece is still being traced, but most of your belongings are ready for you to reclaim." A wave of relief swept over me. "Thank you, Detective," I said, my voice trembling with gratitude. "Hearing this means so much to me." "You're welcome," he replied. "On another note, the evidence against your husband is strong. Between the unauthorized sale of your jewelry, fraud, and the financial discrepancies we've uncovered, he's facing several charges. The DA is moving forward with the case." As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't angry or consumed by thoughts of revenge. I felt calm, ready to let go and move forward. Later that evening, Megan and I met for dinner. She raised her glass with a triumphant smile. "To Helen," she said, "the woman who didn't just survive, she thrived." I chuckled, clinking my glass with hers. "I don't know if I'd call it thriving just yet, but I'll take it." Megan leaned forward, her expression serious. "You're stronger than you think, Helen. Don't let yourself forget that." Her words stayed with me long after I got home that night. A week later, Detective Carter called again. "Mrs. Parker, we've fully recovered all but one piece of your jewelry. The majority is ready for you to reclaim." Hearing that filled me with an overwhelming sense of relief. These weren't just valuable items, they were deeply personal, tangible pieces of my history. When I went to collect the recovered items, holding the sapphire ring my grandmother had given me and the diamond bracelet my mother had worn on her wedding day, I felt like a piece of my life had been returned. The day Michael was formally charged, I received a terse message from him: "You really had to make this a spectacle, didn't you? I hope you're happy. I didn't respond. There was no point in engaging with him. Michael had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. My energy was better spent on myself, on rebuilding and moving forward. That evening, I sat at my dining table, reviewing the final paperwork with my lawyer. Once the divorce is finalized, your financial separation from him will be complete, she assured me. His debts and legal troubles won't affect you. Thank you, I said. The weight of her words lifted another burden from my shoulders. Later that night, I sat alone in my peaceful home. The betrayal, the hurt, the anger, it was all still there, but it no longer consumed me. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I had learned to fight for myself, to reclaim what was mine, and to let go of the things I couldn't control. Megan called to check in. So, she asked brightly, what's next for Helen Parker? I smiled. Honestly? Anything I want. As I hung up, I looked around my home, a space that was finally mine, free from Michael's shadow. His actions had tested me in ways I never could have imagined, but I had come out stronger. My future was finally mine to define. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.